Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. Are there days where you feel like the aches and pains of getting older really sap the joy from your life? Do you feel alone in your fears of what lies ahead? Are you often struggling to find something to look forward to? If you've ever felt like this, then my next guest has great advice for you. An internationally renowned author and speaker on aging and faith, Missy Buchanan draws from her personal experience as a caregiver to share messages of hope and faith with others. She's appeared twice on Good Morning America and co-authored a book with Robin Roberts. Missy's first book, which I love the title of, Living with Purpose in a Worn-Out Body, remains a top seller in addition to 9 other titles. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. Now, let's hear from today's guest. Missy, thank you so much for joining Seniority Authority today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Can you tell us how your journey to being an author and speaker began? I don't think you started out by saying, I want to be a motivational speaker. Did you?
Actually, no. I had no clue that I was going to be doing what I'm doing. It was birthed in real life experiences with my own aging parents. And even before that, my grandparents lived with our family the entire time that I grew up. And so, I was used to being around older adults. As my parents aged, and I was the adult child that was nearest to where they lived, I just began to really pay attention. And I think it came out of after they had moved to a senior living community, and I began to interact with others that lived where they did. And I would hear this phrase a lot, and it began to really bother me. I would hear one person say to another older adult, "How you doing today?" They would answer, "We're just here." Just here.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is. And it was very heartbreaking to me. And it wasn't that my parents were saying it, but I was seeing that amongst all the people that they interacted with every day. And out of that experience, really, I think began to be a keen observer. And I began to write, actually, for my own parents, and for my mother in particular, because by this time, it was hard for her to concentrate on long passages in the Bible or whatever, And so I was trying to put things in the heart language of older adults, that talked about things that were specific to older adults. And in fact, I had gone to the bookstore to try to find some devotional books or something that was uplifting. And I made the mistake of saying, do you have any devotional books for seniors? And of course, they took me to the graduation section, And I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. And what I discovered
different
was
stage of seniors.
Different stage. And so what I discovered, there were a lot of things written about older adults, but very few things that were written for them and to them. And so I literally began to just watch. I remember one day looking at one of the older gentlemen get up from his table and go out to the mailbox, which I could see through the window. And he went out, and I watched his face. He literally left his plate of food and went out and opened up the mailbox, and there was nothing there. And I watched his face just kind of fall. And I just watching and observing and whatever, I think that was the impetus to doing what I'm doing. Although, like I said, I never planned on it. It's been a great adventure.
Well, your books and your messages of hope have reached thousands and thousands of people, and it is a really important countermeasure to all of the insults and injuries that older adults experience just by getting older, it is harder. And on this podcast, we talk about the questions that people have about aging and how to live as healthy and preventively good as you can. But life happens, things happen. And what I like about your work is it meets people where they are. And it recognizes that it can be very, very difficult to be older. And just the very fact, the very title of your first book, living in a worn out body, you're not, in our society, we can get very much, celebratory of 80 and 90-year-olds that are running marathons and climbing mountains. I think what you do is recognize the daily struggle of being in a body that can't do what you had hoped or would like it to do.
That first title, Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body, what's funny about it was that after I signed the contract and my publisher wanted to publish it and they were very excited about it, went through the title committee. And of course, they had the right to name it whatever they want to name it. And so I got an email back that said they wanted to change it, Sacred Living. And my heart sunk. It really did, because I knew that Living with Purpose in a Worn Out Body spoke that audience. Yet I didn't want to lose the contract by arguing with them or whatever. And I just remember being in a real funk. It's like, oh my goodness, what do I do? And my husband was the one that came to me and he said, you know your audience. You know your audience. You're with them. You interact with them. I even had like a focus group, a very informal focus group that I would run things past, because I would tell them, I'm not where you are. I can observe. I need you to tell me. If I'm off track here, tell me. And so with that, I, crafted an email very carefully worded, but yet saying, I've taken the title Sacred Living back to this group and it does not speak to them. It's a lovely title that doesn't speak to where they are. And I'm all about, in fact, that same focus group was so great in that they said something that I just hang on to every day. They said, Missy, whatever you do, don't put on rose-colored glasses and pretend that it's all these. It's not. If you do that, we won't believe anything.
Mm.
And so I have always tried to, in fact, sometimes it'll be the adult children that will say to me, oh, you're so depressing. And I'll say, have you spoken with your aging parent?
Yeah.
Have you talked to them about this? Because there are tough realities. I mean, just last night I was speaking to a church group of probably 100 or so people. And the first 3 people that came up to me afterward, one of them said, with tears in his eyes, his wife had died just 3 months before. He had been caregiver for her for umpteen years. Another one came up. He was in her 90s. He said her daughter, who had been her caregiver, died of COVID. So she has no one there. Yes. And then the third one came up and she has macular degeneration and could not see well or whatever, but wanted to, tell me how much it encouraged her just by listening. But I thought, this is my audience. Mm-hmm. I know this audience. And so it was the first time that my publisher, as I understand it, had gone back to the original title. And I thanked them for that, because they were thinking it's too raw. It's going to turn people off and whatever. That's the story of that.
Well, it's a standout. It's a standout because it recognizes the truth of where people are. And as much as we try to be and are as optimistic and encouraging as we can be on this podcast, we also understand there's things you can't exercise your way out of, eat your way out of, you can't even pray your way out of what you are being given to carry in this life, the burden that you're given to carry in this worn out body. How did you start? You have this great intersection of faith and aging. and aging with, as we say, a worn out body. Not everybody, aging doesn't equal illness. So I don't want to make that mistake, but we're talking right now about people who are struggling because of limitations that they have with their body. Can you tell me how you have seen the impact on faith in that population of people?
I think it's huge, and I will say that when I'm speaking, if I'm speaking to a senior living community, I don't know who has faith, who's a Christian, who's not, whatever. It's just a mixture of people and whatever, but my message stays the same. But the impact that I have seen, not only in my own church family, whatever, and my own family, but also when I travel to speak. So because so many times I will stay at the senior community where I'm speaking, and I may be there for 2 days. And so I'm interacting with many of the older adults and get to hear their stories and whatever. And what has come to my mind about faith, especially, is that people of faith are directed naturally, I think, a sense of purpose. They recognize that there is a divine purpose. Sometimes they forget, and sometimes they need to be reminded. Deep down, they know there is a divine purpose. Or as one of my friends like to say, that seniors are survivors, earmarked, special assignment.
Oh, I like that.
If we begin to look at late life, knowing that there's a reason we're still on the earth, and that there's influence and there's encouragement and there are things that we can do, even for that person who spends most of the day in a wheelchair. I mean, I remember this one 99-year-old man that I used to visit until he died, and he was known as the high five guy because he shared a nursing home room with another resident, spent his time in a wheelchair if he wasn't in bed. And yet, he made it his mission to be the high five guy, whether it was air high fives of people passing by or literal high fives. That became his mantra, so to speak. And I remember one day him saying, "Oh, it was such a little thing," because I was commenting on it. He said, "Oh, it's such a little thing." And I was like, wait a minute. In God's economy, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Don't shortchange yourself. I think that's the reason the role of the church and faith is so important in the aging process, is that it does remind us that we have a God-given purpose. We've got to figure out what that is and how we can fulfill it. I see a real difference between that and then the people who are just saying, "I'm just here." They're just biding their time waiting to die. And, how will we use our time? If we know we're on special assignment, we're going to get up each day, and even with physical limitations or what, we're going to find some way that we can serve other people, that, we can be an encourager, that we can. I think that's huge.
I do too. And we talk a lot about purpose in this group of followers of the podcast, because people are living longer than ever before. They have more time on this earth than ever before. And I find that often people who are facing retirement and a lot of their purpose that they thought they were here for, raising a family, building a business, that's kind of done, and they are struggling to find a new purpose. Have you had those conversations with older adults and
all the time,
who are searching for a purpose?
Absolutely, all the time. And what I try to do is to lift up real life examples to inspire them. And we talk about, what are your gifts? What are your experiences? And maybe you don't want to do what you once did. Maybe you're not able to do it, but maybe you also don't want to do that. But I give them an example. There, a CPA who retired, and then he was like, "I don't know what to do." I mean, he plays golf, he traveled, and yet now he was at a place where he didn't feel like there was anything he could do. But he began to donate his time 1 day a week. a single mom who would come up to the church and he would help the budget and he would help the tax.
Great.
He redirected the gifts that he had into a way that was serving others. There was an Air Force colonel at the age of 90. At the age of 90, he'd been a caregiver for his wife until she died. And then he was lost because he got up and it was like he didn't have her there to care for. He had no idea what he was going to do. It took one person to ask him. He would be the one who would organize the food pantry. The local
oh my gosh, what a great,
because he had
organized,
organizational
military.
skills. Exactly. He took that on, and by doing so, he made friends. He had a not only did it on Mondays when they asked him, he was there during the week. So I will lift up different examples. I mean, I just did this last night with that group I was speaking. I'll probably give them 20 different examples, and then I'll say, think about now. What can you do? What do you want to do? How do you want to use the gifts that you have to encourage, to serve, along those lines? And I think those real life examples give them the most hope because they're like, somebody else is doing it. Well, I bet I can do that,
Sure. And it's practical. And as I say to a lot of people, we have so many nonprofits out there who are doing work, who need people of all different skills, whether it's helping with a mailing or running numbers or organizing a food pantry or mentoring. It's just, there's a tremendous amount of need, and that is not going away anytime soon.
Exactly.
Is there one attitude in all of the thousands of people that you've talked to in your speaking engagements, and what attitude do you think holds most older adults back from living a more joyful life? What is the kind of barrier that you come up against most often?
Okay, you're going to shoot me on this because I'm going to repeat the very same thing. For me, it is when older adults do not feel a sense of purpose, it interferes with everything else, because when they do not tend to get in a negative state of mind, or they fall into that very stagnant, or resistant to any change. But I think it has to do with purpose first. And then I would say beyond that, one of the phrases that I just encourage, in fact, many times I'll tell older adults, you're not getting out of this room until I hear you repeat it, and that's joyfully adapt.
Joyfully adapt.
Yeah. It's not happily, because there are going to be moments and things that happen we're not happy about. Joy is different, particularly in light of faith and whatever that we draw on. And then, go back to the man sitting in the wheelchair and whatever, that he was igniting joy in someone else by his simple action of doing the high five. I tell them the story of an aqueduct that was in Spain, that the townspeople decided they were going to build a new water system and route the water down in the new water system. And they were going to say the aqueduct is this historical architectural feature or whatever. And that's what they did. What they didn't know was that once the water was not running down the aqueduct, it began to just crumble and it fell apart. And I said, that's the way it is, I think, with purpose. Is that you think of purpose being that water that cools and that, refreshes us and whatever, that you can sit around a table with older adults and just in conversation, you can quickly pick out those that are living with a sense of purpose and those who are not. Mm-hmm. And which is why I think the role of the church is so important, that we need people to walk alongside, and families too, to walk alongside and help them redefine what that purpose might be, how that's going to be lived out, and to beyond their own grandchildren too. I mean, whether it's something intergenerational, but there's always something that we can do. So I think that's really huge, and it does and play into that whole joyfully adapt? How will I can't change the fact that my hip's worn out, or, I've already had 2 knee surgeries, and I have arthritis, and I can't change that. I can't change that. I can joyfully adapt and make something beautiful out of it.
I think that's enormous. I think it is enormous because my experience, some older adults are resistant. a lot of all of us are, never mind
Sure.
older adults. We're all resistant to change. We're wired that way. But the more you resist, the harder it becomes. And I also find people who are in a more discouraged frame of mind tend to look back and say, I used to do this.
Yes.
I used to be this. I used to. And I think that it is so critical for us to be in the here and now and look forward to what I still can do.
Exactly.
And I think it's a real adaptation in people's mindsets.
I have a saying that that I tell them all the time. I said, it's fine to drive your RV down memory lane. Just don't park it today.
I like that.
We need to remember, and it is important to remember, and there's value in remembering. But that's very different from living it. And yes, I mean, change is such a huge part of their lives, and that's one of the things that I try to bring up and applaud them for is how much change they've already endured. And I call it the perfect storm, in that our older adults today are living in a time that is much like the perfect storm, the George Clooney movie, where, the 2 hurricanes come together and produce this massive storm. And I said, you're living in it. If you are, say, 75 and above, you're living in it. Because just as your body and your mind are slowing down, the world has never gone faster.
Yeah, that is true.
It's different for someone right now who's 85 than it was for someone who was 85 even 30 years ago, because of the speed of change. And so, I try to applaud them. And I also try to help them practice change. And because I think that's important. That's
how do you get them to practice change?
All things like take a different route today. Instead of walking the same way or driving the same way. In fact, I had one lady just last week who said, after I was telling her about this, she said, well, I'm going to drive home a different route. I just hope I don't get lost. But if they're used to reading and they read romance novels, read an autobiography. If they're used to watching XYZ television show, watch documentary. You've got to be intentional about practicing those little daily changes, because that then helps us when the bigger changes come. It keeps our minds flexible.
That's fantastic, because I was going to ask you what practice or habit you would recommend to our listeners to cultivate a happier life and a more prepared life. So that sounds like one, because I try to give our listeners some practical things. So that sounds like one practical piece of advice.
Well, you'll probably laugh at the next one then. I'll probably step on some toes here. I think one of the biggest things is to turn off cable news and talk radio.
Yes.
I
love that.
Well, this really concerns me because of all the places that I visit, and it's across the nation. I mean, it's not just my hometown. It's everywhere. I can walk down the hall and people will have their doors open and I'm hearing cable news. It's loud and it's one commentator trying to overtalk the other one and they're arguing. And that is eroding. I mean, there's research on it, but it is eroding the well-being of our older adults and has become the soundtrack many of their days. That really, really does concern me. And I'll tell them, I said, I don't care if it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or any one of them. I don't care. Turn it off. If you really, I want you to know what's going on in the world. And 20 or 30 minutes news, that's all you need. And if you're going to scroll on social media, that's fine. But limit it 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and just don't engage with all the stuff that's out there. Because I said, if you feel your blood pressure going up, or, if you realize, oh, that is not news. Like I said, it's commentators arguing with each other. And it's time to turn it off. And I really do get very concerned for our older population, because they're becoming marinated in it, I would say.
I think you're exactly on target. And the challenge is it's a competition for your mind.
Oh, it is.
And you're giving people your mind. And when we were growing up, 1950s, 1960s, all you needed was 1 hour for news.
Yeah.
And you don't need 24-hour news. Yeah. Nobody needs 24-hour news except advertisers. That's the only thing. And it does marinate them, and it marinates them in all the negative, sensational aspects of life. So I 100% agree with your recommendation.
Like I said, I probably stepped on some toes, but it's real important to me, because it is the most dangerous thing that I see out there right now in regard to the well-being of our older adults.
Yeah, turn off talk radio and turn on Seniority Authority podcast.
There you go. That's
anything, podcast, documentary, read a book,
Oh, I said, turn on the Hallmark channel. If you got but then not only turn it off, then stop and substitute that truly with, what can I do for somebody else today?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to brighten somebody's day? And in making that mindset switch, I think it is so helpful.
If you're getting smarter, help us reach more minds. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends to follow us on social, or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org. So it's practice change. Start changing small things. Your route to work, your route down the hall.
The food you eat, try a new food.
Yeah.
All kind of simple things.
So that limit your screen time, especially social media and CNN. Turn off CNN and cable news. Thank you, cable news, and limit that to a half an hour. And focus on other people. What can you do for someone else? Can you write a note? Can you pick up the phone? Can you wave to somebody going by? Engage in someone in conversation. The more human interaction we can do, the better you'll be. One question that I have is that it seems statistically now, you're a woman of faith, deep faith, and yet it seems in our country there are more people growing up unchurched, that with no church practice, no faith practice, and that is statistically going down. I am sure you talk to people who do not have faith. How do you deliver your message to people without faith?
It's the same message that I deliver to people with faith. But let me say that I am not a Bible thumper. I am not a hit you over the head with the Bible type. That's not what I do. And I found that by drawing on the common fears and concerns and uncertainties that face all older adults, that is where I think I begin to build a relationship with people. One of the questions that I'll ask them, I say, you lay down at night, or do you wake up in the middle of the night? what are the fears, the concerns, or the things that you dread most about aging? And of course, they'll come up with things like, I don't want to become a burden on my family, or I worry about hearing the doctors say that I have dementia, or I'm worried that I'm going to outlive my money, or that, the death of a loved one. And these are real and they are universal. I mean, I've spoken in South Africa, I've spoken in Scotland, I've spoken in all across the United States, and it's universal. These are the same thing over and over that I will hear. And so I think in talking about how we then face those fears, it brings in opportunities for faith, but not in, like I said, not in a way that I think is obtrusive or is much in your face. And it would be different if I'm speaking to a church group, obviously. But if I'm speaking at a senior community where they're going to be all different kinds of people, I try to be very careful about that and respectful, because I think that many times they're drawn into the conversation then because, well, here I may have a scripture verse, or something, and they're drawn to that only because I've established kind of a relationship. Like, I understand where you are. This has got to be frightening to wake up in the middle of the night and think about, what am I going to do if I have to move? Where am I going to go? What if I do get dementia? I have the resources to pay for care, just all these things. And so I try to start at that place. And then, it wasn't too long ago that there was a gentleman that came up to me after I was speaking. And again, when I'm speaking in a senior community, I don't know what people's faith is.
Sure.
He came up to me and he said, what I realized from this was that he said his wife had recently died. And he said she was the woman of faith. And he said, I think I always thought that's all I needed to do was to hold on to her coattail. Now she's gone. And he said, and I went to we had the funeral church that she went to that I didn't really go. But he said, I didn't even know where the bathroom.
Mm.
And he said, that made me realize that I wanted to have the assurance she had and whatever, and it opened the door to conversation. And so that's just the way that I approach it. And I think from the feedback that I get, I think that's been helpful to those who are wondering, because it opens up conversations about that, about end of life issues, about afterlife, and I don't have all the, and I'll tell them that. So at least I think it begins the conversation, and I think that's important.
Well, yes, and it establishes common ground.
Yes.
So if you have this fear of aging, of death, of illness, of how to pay for your care, that is more of a commonality. And I think that's another thing that is hard to find and hold on to in our society today, where people are very divisive. It can say, you're saying, I'm not pushing a particular religion or a particular faith. I am just saying, do you have these fears? And
Exactly.
I can help you think about a sense of purpose and a sense of giving back to others that does not require you to adhere to any formal religion, any formal church, etc. Do you think that's part of why your books have been so widely accepted, because of that kind of open?
So.
Yeah,
I really do. So, and then I hope too that those older adults who are people of faith will display behavior that will then influence those who are not believers. I think what I can do is kind of open the door, but then, I hope that other older adults will be the ones that step in and begin to model what a life aging is like. Because I do make a distinction between growing older and aging faithfully.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same.
Oh, absolutely not.
And so we'll talk about growing older. You got to do some breathe. As long as you can breathe, you're growing older. But to age faithfully requires very intentional focus. And so hopefully those older adults who are adhering to the aging faithfully will then influence those around them who may not be people of faith, who are watching and learning. So,
because we're all models,
Yes.
We're all providing, just like, those in the audience who are moms know that, your children watch every single thing that you do, when you don't think they're looking. Yeah, exactly. When you don't want them to. And so same as we are getting older, you're still that model. And the older you get with these illnesses, you are either an example of what people would emulate or what they want to avoid.
Exactly it.
Yeah, it's your choice. You have a new book out called From Dry Bones to Living Hope. Can you describe what that's about?
Funny that during COVID would have seemed to have been the perfect time to write, because you're home, particularly in the early stages of COVID, I just couldn't figure it out. And my publisher was like, don't you want to be working on something new? I just,
you're home. You should be doing, you should be working.
And I think I was so distracted by everything that was going on with COVID and trying to figure it all out. I don't know. And then one day, remembered something that my father had said. And keep in mind that both of my parents were so proactive about making decisions about their own aging, moving to senior community before they had to, and whatever, we're just very proactive. And I watched all of that. I remember one day when my father said, there are days that it feels like a wilderness. And I never forgot that, because I knew what he was talking about was, things feel unfamiliar, it just was dry. I discovered that my own parents' church, that no one had been visiting them. This was long before COVID, just all of those kind of complications. And so probably early 2020, maybe, all of a sudden this kind of popped in my head, and I thought, the Valley of the Dry Bones, Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones, where they're all piled up. And I thought, that's how many older adults feel, that they've gone through so many losses, whether, a loss of a career, a loss of identity, a loss of home, a loss of belongings, loss of loved ones, loss of the spouse, just loss of physical abilities, loss of the ability to drive. And they begin to pile up like dry bones.
Yeah.
So I decided, okay, I'm going to write. Got real excited about it then. It's like, okay, I want to make this parallel to the journey of aging and how it can feel so unfamiliar and how these losses can pile up. And am I ever going to get out of this wilderness? And yet, I think God calls us to bloom and to blossom in that unfamiliar land. And so it was there that I began writing, and so paralleling the story of Ezekiel and the dry bones, how the bones come together and they live, and so that became the parallel that I wanted to do. So there's talk in there about the difference between, like I was saying, between lament and grumbling. And there are moments where it's like, that digital divide, where you feel like the rest of the world is, all the younger generations, everything's so digital and they know how to do it. And I feel so lost. I feel like an exile, and so there's this digital divide. And so we talk about that. Everything is written in terms of of what that wilderness experience is, yet that God is calling us to live and those bones to dance in the wilderness. So that's kind of where that came from.
That's fantastic. It is really exactly where people are, where you've got the digital natives, the grandkids that, know how to text when they're 9. 4. I mean, and world going faster and piled up losses. That's so exciting because it really feels like you are where the older adult is, but then you create this path for enlightenment, a different way, a different twist on where they are. In your audience, do you find yourself talking and writing for the older adult and the adult child, that oxymoron of adult child, or who's kind of absorbing, reading, going to your lectures?
It's such a mixture. And that has been really quite exciting. I mean, obviously most of my books are written for and to older adults themselves. But I've also recognized how important family is, and younger family members, and how I want them to try to understand if they're going to journey alongside their aging parents. There are things that they need to understand. I think about, I wrote one of my books called Voices of Aging, came about because I realized that the adult children were talking mostly to their adult children friends, and the older adults were talking mostly to their older aging parents. So each generation was talking to themselves, but they really weren't talking together. And so what I did in that book was try to take issues like, giving up the keys to the car or boundaries, things like that. And on the first page, it's like crawling inside the mind of the adult child. So that if it's, we're talking about driving, they're saying things like, God, can't they understand they're going to hurt somebody? Mm-hmm. They're going to hurt themselves, whatever. And you hear that. Then on the next page, like crawling inside the mind of the older adult or the aging parent, saying, I know they intend well, and they tell me that they'll take me places. But don't they understand that once I give up the keys to the car, it is my last shred of independence?
Right.
And so then trying to bring each generation, try to stand in the shoes of the other. There have been so many interesting generational aspects to it. I had a youth group in Tennessee. The youth director required all of his students to read Living with Purpose in a Worn-Out Body. And
wow. That's incredible. Talk about the exact opposite.
Exactly. Can you imagine how thrilled they were? I mean, luckily, it's a long book. I'm sure they were just like overwhelmed. But his thinking was they were going to be ministering and building relationships with older adults in this living center that was across the street from the church. And he was trying to prepare them and to help them. And beauty of all of it was, out of reading Living with Purpose in a Worn-Out Body, teenagers began to understand they shared feelings with the older adult. There were things that they both felt vulnerable about bodies, mm-hmm. about body image, about abilities, it's like certain fears and whatever. And even though, it may not have been based on the same things, they could understand those feelings. And so I remember when he told me that he had done this, I said, just promise me one thing. Do not go one time and then say, you're done. It's about building relationships with them and whatever, and so, and turned it into a real wonderful ministry. Back to your question and all, I mean, like I said, I never know who's going to be there. I love it anytime a different generation has some enlightenment or has a better understanding of the other generation, because I just think it's hugely important if we're going to walk alongside one another. And it's going to be our turn one day for our kids to walk alongside us. We want them to have that understanding. So I think the more, widely we read each other's things, I think the better we'll all be.
I love that story and that analogy. And that's so true when you think about teenagers and how they feel about their bodies. And
exactly.
It's same, so they can really learn from each other. That's really cool. I love that. What does your work in writing about aging do to change your attitude towards your own aging process? And what are you going to do differently as you get older?
I have to remember to pick my own words. And I do try. I mean, I think about it, Mom. I'm 71 now. And, so I'm beginning to experience some of the things. I mean, the knees that won't work as well and things like that. One is I hope to be as proactive as my own parent. I have written in one of my publications, I wrote an open letter to my children and, laying out some of these things. And we've had lots of conversation, but I want to be proactive in planning my own future as much as I possibly can. But at the same time, I've got to be the proponent of joyfully adapting as I possibly can because, it may mean that I need to move somewhere, sometime, whenever, or, and then I've learned so many things from older adults whom I just adore. Lucy Marion Roberts, Robin Roberts' mother, was such an encourager to me. And I watched her that even though she could not drive, she used a power chair or a walker, and yet she was my biggest cheerleader. She was my biggest. It was after my parents had died. She would write. She would call. She would end every conversation with, "I love you now. Now you keep writing and speaking for old people like me because we need you."
Oh, that's great.
So, I'm at the airport and my plane's delayed or something, and I can hear her voice of encouragement. And that it just goes a long, long way. So I hope to be very mindful of all the older adults who have gone before me and have lived and finished well. And I want to walk in their footsteps and learn from them as much as I can. Yeah.
That's wonderful. What's next for you, and how can our listeners stay in touch with you? In the show notes, we'll have links. We have links to all your books. But and do you have a calendar where you announce where you're going to be speaking next?
I don't, because some of mine are closed. Different events and whatever. I do post most of them on Twitter or on Facebook. My Twitter handle is just Missy Buchanan. The easiest way on Facebook is to go to my community page, Aging in Faith, Missy Buchanan. But I'm hoping that my next project will be about intergenerational relationships. That I've done quite a few presentations on that, and I'm real excited about it because I think, again, it points to the significant role that older adults can take if we think beyond our own grandchildren. There are a lot that think about their own and that's great. I have grandchildren that's hugely important, but I think we need to think even beyond our own grandchildren to things that we can do, relationships between the generations. And as we do, we got to realize we're teaching them. So as you said earlier, we're teaching them about how to age. And so what we have to decide is, what do we want to teach them?
Yeah.
Because
we're teaching them whether we want to or not.
Exactly. They're watching and learning. And so, and I'll tell this to older adults all the time, is you're not aware when people are watching you and they're thinking, I want to grow older like that, or I don't.
Yes.
And so It's probably, well, that, and then since COVID is kind of listed in whatever, I'm making up for lost time with hundreds, it seems like hundreds of speaking events that had to be canceled during COVID, and lots of trips and travel and whatever related to that. But it's all exciting. I just have to pace myself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not as easy to keep up the energy level as is one. But,
yeah. So. We have to joyfully adapt.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Well, we know you're a beautiful writer, a faith-filled person, but let's get to know you a little bit better and share with us your favorite guilty pleasure.
That would have to be Tex-Mex food, like queso and chips.
Okay,
it's
and
not healthy for you, but it is so good.
And you live in the right place for it.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite healthy practice?
I'm a walker. I walk each morning. I try to work at listening to a podcast, something again that I think will kind of stretch my mind and not just specific topics, but kind of all around. And so I try to do that.
Excellent. So you are following what you
are
practicing what you preach. Tell us the last book that you loved.
That one had to be Caitlin Chess's Liturgy of Politics. Ooh. It has to do, she's a young gal and such a great writer. It has to do with all the vision and whatever in our world, in the U.S. particularly, around partisan issues and whatever, and what we in the church need to do, I think, to try to bridge those divisions. It's a really, really wonderful book.
Wow. Very interesting. Okay. What's guaranteed to make you laugh, Missy?
Oh, my kids and my grandkids sitting around the dinner table.
That sounds wonderful. Telling stories.
That's the best. That's the best.
And what's your favorite escape?
That would have to be an crowded beach where it's warm.
Yeah.
I wrote the Beach Calling, a devotional journal for the middle years and beyond, because I was trying to find a gentle way to draw particularly boomers into a conversation about aging. And so I'm sitting out on a beach and I'm going, oh, this is it. This is it. I mean, boomers, we love our beaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, trying to use visions of and sounds and whatever of the beach life, and then pull them into what, how that could be interpreted about aging and less of aging. So, yeah, I would have to say an uncrowded beach. I don't like really crowded where there's just so many people you can't hardly see the water. So, it's my deal.
Okay. That sounds like a place I would like as well. I have a favorite beach in mind. And it's interesting because it is a nice way to bring, again, very, very accessible. When you think about using the beach as a metaphor, it's also accessible to people who may feel like, oh, well, I'm not a religious person or a church person. It's, we all are going to be having these experiences of aging and change, whether we want to or not, or, hopefully whether we want to or not. So I like that. Yeah. It's been really wonderful to have you here, Missy. You're inspiring. Your writing is fantastic. As I said, it's very accessible. Listeners, if you have not picked up a book of Missy's yet, you are, it's a disservice to yourself and the people in your life. So thank you very much for joining us. That's our show for today. If you enjoyed it, please like and follow us on social media and tell your friends so we can keep the conversation going. Until then, enjoy your chance to get smarter while growing older.